All right, welcome to the conversation on the Ti-Hua Network. Today we're going to have Ti-Hua Cenk, our investigative reporter at Ti-Hua Investigates, join us to talk about something that he cares deeply about. That's very important in the news. Normally his beat is environmental issues and money and politics, but there's a rise in anti-Asian crime, and we want to talk about that. Ti-Hua, first, of course, welcome back to the show. But secondly, can you tell us, for the folks who are not familiar with what's going on in Northern California, why there's so much concern now?
Well, there have been a number of vicious assaults and, in fact, murders of elderly Asians who were just literally walking down the street. I mean, it started with an 89-year-old grandmother set on fire in New York City, an 84-year-old grandfather who was shoved to the ground and killed. Another Asian American man in his 60s was sliced across the face on the subway in New York City. And at least, and also in New York City, Chinatown, there was a stabbing. The guy survived, he's barely survived. And then in California, you have these attacks, and you've had some 3,000 assaults on Asian Americans in the last year, which is a huge increase. As a result, probably because of the pandemic, and primarily, I think, because the president of the United States at the time, the most powerful man in the whole world, kept repeatedly saying China virus, and even mocked the Chinese and Asian Americans by saying Kung Flu virus. And that has an impact. When the president of the United States is saying things like that, then everybody thinks it's okay. It's okay to be a racist. And we've seen that kind of attitude permeate in this country, and this country has a race problem. There's a lot of racism and among a lot of races toward each other, including Asians toward others and everybody else toward us. And so you combine that with a president saying something like that, with a race problem in this country, and then the coronavirus did start in China, and some ignorant people will think, well, that means every Asian person that's carrying the virus or has caused it, although viruses pop up all over the world. And SARS started in this country, in a pig farm in North Carolina. So that's the reason why it's happening. But there's been a long history of racism against Asians. We're always the other people. And it's combined now where we're sort of like the model minority, so that some white people look at us as a people of color, but people of color look at us as sort of like these kind of wannabe white people. So we're sort of caught in between sometimes. The good news is, though, that I don't think that's true among most of the young people. And the Pew Institute said that 2/3 of millennials are not racist, sexist, or homophobic. So we can only hope that maybe the future will be a little bit better.
So, Ti-Hua, I know there's some facts to back up what you're saying. Obviously, there's 31% increase in anti-Asian racist slurs and jokes since the coronavirus began. And by the way, if we're looking at who's spreading the virus the most, that is clearly us, all of us Americans. It's not, yes, it started in China, but they got it under control very quickly, whereas we let it rage and rage and rage. And unfortunately, we spread it to other countries as well. We had the worst number of cases, worst number of deaths in America than any other country. By the way, you said SARS started here, so did the Spanish flu. Ironically, Spain was the only one addressing it, so people heard it was coming from Spain. Everybody else was doing censorship. It actually started with American soldiers in Kansas. So we've been through this before, and there's a lot of propaganda that goes along with it. But in this case, some of the assailants, whether it's Northern California or New York, where most of the cases are, as you gave several examples of, are of different races, different motivations. It appears. One of the worst attackers seems to have mental health issues. So how sure are we that it's related to the epidemic and how Trump riled people up against Asians within that pandemic?
Because I think the president set an attitude for the whole country, a country that has a race problem and has had a long history of anti-Asian racism. From the Exclusion Act in 1882 against Chinese, to the internment of Japanese Americans, to the killing of Vincent Chin. My own daughter has experienced it in her public school in New York City, where a couple of years ago, every day, somebody was calling her a name, to the point where I told the principal I gave her permission to punch them out. So this is
Wow.
something that when you have a president setting something up like that, you establish a precedent that says it's okay to be racist. And I think he established that for the country, and he said it very often. My dog apparently agrees. Anyway, so I think when you say that, for example, oh, that's a deranged person. Well, what other person stabs an old man in the back? And then the person who stabbed the man in New York City in Chinatown said that I didn't like the way he looked at me, which meant he had to look at his face if he didn't like the way he looked at him. So if somebody's deranged and your president is saying, and at the time our president was saying, oh, Kung Flu virus, hey, it's okay to mock Asians, you establish a precedent, you establish an atmosphere that says, hey, it's okay to attack an Asian. So what? It's no big deal. And then somebody else who's a little crazy will carry that a little further. Yes, most of the attacks have been verbal, but a good percentage, it's now roughly nearly 10%, have become physical assaults. And we have a number of people, elderly people, who killed. In San Francisco, it was a 91-year-old, or it was Oakland, 91-year-old man shoved from behind. For what? I mean, who does that?
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to assume somebody's already a little bit deranged, but where did that deranged come from? Why did you pick an Asian old man? Why aren't there all old people being attacked? And there's a reason for that. The reason is the pandemic. People were probably a little crazy from the pandemic, but also because the president kept saying repeatedly, China virus, Kung Flu virus, that has an effect on people. It says, hey, it's okay. They're not. And then he even said, he made a statement, oh, Asian Americans are good. They're on our side. Well, wait, our side, meaning we're not part of America? That's a key issue here. Asians are not seen as being American. I was born and raised in New York City. Can't tell you how many times people say, where are you from? I say, New York. They say, no, where are you really from? And then I ask them, I say, well, where are you from? Well, I'm from New York. I don't know, where are you from? You don't look like a Native American to me. Somewhere along the line, you're from somewhere. But for Asians, it's never good enough. I did a story with a Chinese American woman in Denver who was a sixth generation Chinese American whose great grandfather had worked on the Transcontinental Railroad, and her entire life growing up in Denver, she was asked, where are you really from? That's a problem. It's a problem of education. People don't learn in history, in American history, about the contributions made. Without the Transcontinental Railroad, built by Chinese workers over the Sierra Nevada, Irish and African American workers in the East, there would be no America. The economy would never have grown. It would never have united the country. That's not taught in school. I didn't learn that in high school. My kids have not learned a lot about that yet. And certainly there's very little, well, there's some talk about the Chinese Exclusion Act in my kids' school because they're in a progressive school, one of them anyway. But you don't learn about, I didn't learn about the Japanese American internment until I got to college. And one of my college suite mates, his parents had been interned in World War II.
Right.
Even though they were loyal Americans. So there is a whole history there that has to be put into context when you talk about these things.
Right. And almost no one knows that there's only been one race or ethnicity or nationality that has ever been banned completely from America, and it was the Chinese. So that was
first. We were not the only ones. We were the first. We were the first to be banned from the U.S. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which was a result of a depression in the West Coast, and after the Chinese workers built the railroads, because of the depression, they had to have a scapegoat. And right now, there is an issue that's going to have to be addressed that every Asian American will face. And that is, as the U.S. and China, two superpowers, begin to compete, the more they compete, the more pressure there will be in this country and the more racism there will be, unless it's addressed where Asian Americans are viewed as Americans.
Yeah. So, and by the way, my son got the same thing. My wife is from Taiwan. She's ethnically Chinese. And some kid right before the lockdown began about a year ago, instantly in his school asked them, hey, I hear the Chinese eat bats, and that's why we all got the disease. So it just spreads like wildfire. And then it does lead to a thing called stochastic terrorism, whereas Trump doesn't say go attack, this specific person. He just says, generally blames all Asians for it. And then people do attacks especially the ones who are unbalanced. So that's why the language is so important. But we only have a minute left, Ti-Hua. Real quick, what are some folks doing to fight back against this, whether it's actors or anyone else that are leading the movement in this case?
Well, one of the most important things is to be able to unite with other Americans and fight racism overall, not just for Asians, but against in the Black Lives Matter. In New York City, for example, during the summer, when I was in New York City, when I watched the Black Lives Matter marches, what gave me the most encouragement is I saw huge numbers of Black people, white people, Asians, and Latinos, and most of them young. And it wasn't just small, like one or two. It was like huge groups of that. And I think that's something that has to be considered, that we need to fight racism overall in this country. And we need to view each other as human beings. And hopefully, the entertainment media is a critical part of this too, is that too many of these shows, like Bling Empire, show that every Asian is super rich or something. And we have to show Asian Americans as people, not all kung fu experts, not all super rich people, just human beings. Like the Netflix movie, the half of it was a good movie, and Farewell. Just show as we are as human beings, and that's what we need to see more in the entertainment field too.
All right, Ti-Hua Cenk obviously cares a lot about this and has worked on this, and is a great investigative reporter. Ti-Hua, thank you so much for joining us and spreading the message about this issue today.
All right, thanks, Cenk. Take care.
All right, you too.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.